So I wasn't sure. I'm going to sell ShamWow. That's right. So I wasn't sure how to handle being the bottleneck to happy hour. So I turned to a community, in this case Twitter, and it was recommended that I make this whole talk a drinking game. And the word's community. Anyways, just kidding.
What do we need? Do we need to hand out shots now?
Right, Jello shots all around. Anyways, no, I'm thrilled to be here because I think that community management is really one of the most misunderstood and most important jobs and disciplines of our time. Every company is obviously a community now in some ways, and or they're trying to make themselves into communities. And there are a lot of industries being transformed by communities, and it all comes down to, of course, customer service and the whole concept of not only customer service and helping people when they have problems, but also informing the product design and development process based on what the customers actually want, which the community managers know better than anyone else. It's just kind of like the writing's on the wall, and I just feel like this summit and this movement will become something that is very transformative over the years, and we'll look back and say, hey, we were there then. So it's kind of cool. So what I thought I would do today is share a little bit into the vertical of the creative world and things that we've learned trying to connect the creative community, and try to extract some lessons learned that I think are relevant to the types of things you might be doing and trying to achieve with the communities that you're building or serving as stewards of. And then also I'll end with just a few thoughts around things that we've learned building community that I think may relate to you. Also, by the way, we have one of our community managers in the audience, Al. Hey, Al. See, that's why I'm nervous. So let's get started. Obviously, communities have many purposes, but one of the things that I've always been fascinated with is that communities can yield transparency and a great sense of opportunity on the career side, as well as on the personal side. And that's one of the things that got Matthias and I thinking when we started Behance. And Behance was really born to solve a problem, which was that the creative world is a world that makes our lives interesting. The creative world is also probably one of the most disorganized communities on the planet. And when these people actually get their act together, they transform things as we know them. And it's really amazing. I mean, if you think about it, everything around us, was in some ways designed or conceived in the mind of a creative person. And think about all the things that are in people's minds that never see the light of day. This is the importance of the creative community getting organized. So we set out to try to organize the creative world. And of course, when we told people that, people were like, oh, good luck with that. But we really tried to take this mission very seriously. And there were three kind of themes or parts of our thesis for the future of creative careers that we kept in mind. The first is that creative careers would be more independent and distributed than ever before. That people would no longer be relegated to working in desks in large companies, that there would be more independence. That there would be more collaboration and resourcefulness than ever before. People would want to leverage each other's work when creating things. They'd want to collaborate on projects. They want to really make sure that they're putting their community to work for them in their creative process. And the third was that we felt like creative careers, more than ever before, would be determined by merit, rather than what agency you happen to work for, or who you happen to know, or what school you happen to go to. We felt like this was another trend we wanted to capitalize on in building a community for the creative world. And so that's what we did. And just for those of you that don't know, so Behance is a community of now well over 3 million creatives all around the world, showcasing their work in the form of projects. And each project, of course, collectively, many projects make up a portfolio, but each individual project really tells a story and can contain multimedia. And then, of course, people can comment on them and appreciate them if they like them and collect them and things like that. And these projects also push themselves out to other sites all around the world that we power for schools and individual people's portfolio sites. So it's all centralized as a network of creative professionals, but there are many places that this content can be displayed. So this community knows that their work is being seen by as many people as possible, which is the mission of the company, or the product rather, is to really showcase and discover creative work. So the objective here was to use technology to organize and connect the creative community and really change an industry. The problem is that we realized that the internet, as excited as we may be about it, does not necessarily foster meritocracy, innovation, and access to opportunity naturally. In fact, in many cases, the internet works against these things. You see things like crowdsourcing, which are the lowest common denominator, making people get paid less, not more for their work, and then attribution, people never getting credit for their work. Stuff shows up on Tumblr and no one ever knows who actually did it. And so, does the internet actually help or hurt this? And of course, we saw the bright side, but these were some of the challenges and subsequent realizations that we had in building our community that I think you may appreciate. So let me share some of those with you, if that's okay. And I'll start with the first one, which is this question about the long tail. Anyone ever know of or read the book about the long tail, right? It's all about the fact that there's a community out there for everyone. And everyone kind of finds their tribe. And it's really, really exciting. The problem with the long tail, and by the way, there are some many great examples of the long tail that many of you may be familiar with, like Ravelry. I think this is a network of like 10 million knitters. There's chef networks, there's networks just for photographers, and the list goes on, just for infographic designers, and I'm sure many of you have very niche communities that foster and serve an audience very, very well, which is great, by the way, because people need to find their tribe. The problem, though, is that as the web verticalizes itself, it's also isolating itself. And why is this a problem? Well, this is a problem because it goes against everything we know about innovation. All the research about innovation suggests that it happens in the clashes of difference. When people from one discipline and another discipline happen to be forced to connect and see each other's work, and maybe even comment on each other's work. And this is not a new idea. This starts back in like Medici times in ancient Italy, when you had like an architect and a fisherman having a bottle of wine at a cafe, talking about a problem, and they create a new type of net that changes the industry of fishing forevermore. So it's not a new concept, but in some ways the internet is actually kind of working against it rather than for it. And so when we were designing Behance, we had this big question at the beginning. Do we help people instantly verticalize themselves? Do we help you find your group and then immediately make it 100% your group and have you be blown away by that fact? Or do we optimize the product towards the clashes of difference? Do we make sure that industrial designers are seeing fashion photographers, who are seeing makeup artists, who are seeing animators? And obviously there are pluses and minuses to both sides of that argument. But what we decided to do is say, okay, obviously we're going to have the search and filter capability to make this verticalized, but let's really try to broadly cover the entire creative industry and promote those clashes of difference. And here's what we found. So 95% of creatives, actually more than 95% of creatives on Behance, actually follow people in creative fields other than their own, which seems kind of obvious. Like, how could you not want to follow some amazing motion graphics artist or something? But obviously that follow functionality wouldn't be available if it was just for photographers. People would not be following these people out of their fields. But more interestingly enough, about half of all people actually publish a project in a field other than their own. And this is where it became really interesting. People were starting, we had one example of a guy named Harris Whittingham, a photographer based in Brooklyn, a wedding photographer, who just, trying to make it as a wedding photographer, taking photographs and puts them up on Behance. And one of them is this maybe 7-year-old boy in a little tuxedo shirt with a bow tie running on the street. And he put it up on his portfolio. And then this photo illustrator, this guy named Arkan Nair in India, finds this piece of work and illustrates it. And they put it up as a joint project, a jointly owned project that lives in both of their portfolios on Behance. And it gets discovered by Kanye West, who takes this image and puts it on his blog. And suddenly these guys are getting commissioned for CD covers. The photography would never have done it, the illustration would have never done it, but combined, they had a new discipline. And there are a lot of examples like that. Another one is the whole field of light design. The people who build the lights that are in shows and whatever, they have portfolios on Behance. And there's a huge community on Behance as well of graffiti artists. And these folks also found each other and decided to start in 2007 this group called Lick Factor out of Cologne, Germany, where they run around with flashlights taking pictures, and it's like a graffiti light art. It's a brand new type of medium that they debut on Behance. And then Sprint and Absolute Vodka and all these other companies and agencies hire them out of Cologne, Germany to do these campaigns for them. And the Sprint Speed of Light campaigns were all done by this team out of Cologne, Germany. And so this is the type of thing that happens when you foster the overlap of difference in community. And it's one of those things as stewards of community that we have to think about. The last example of, I think, why this is kind of cool is you really get a diversified sense of what's going on in the world. And I remember our team came into work a few years ago after the big earthquake in Japan. And we opened up the most recent stream, and we saw tons of projects just being published that were all a response to this crisis. Creatives of different disciplines responding through their work to either raise money or just actually relate to it. The same thing happened when Steve Jobs passed away. We found thousands of projects that were a tribute to Steve Jobs because obviously this struck a chord in the creative community. So, point being, host the overlap, and you get a great insight into the world and prompt innovation. Number two is this incredible thing that we've all done in our communities, or many of us, which is we can sort by likes and comments and look and views and all this stuff. And in some ways what we've done is we've created these new filters of curation. And I love that the way I get really technical with this group. Everyone's probably thinking of the same things. People get filters of curation. What does that even mean? But I think you understand what I mean. So in some ways what we've done is we've empowered the masses without discernment. And the like button, is an example. It becomes a popularity contest. And sometimes certain projects on Behance, we have our little appreciation button at the bottom of a project. And if you just count the raw number of appreciations on a project, sometimes projects are rising the ranks for the wrong reasons. There might be some scantily clad person in the picture in the project. I remember one project was done by the set designer for one of the Harry Potter films, and for some reason this project ends up as a link on one of the Harry Potter fan sites for like 13-year-olds. And suddenly this project gets like hundreds of thousands of views of inbound traffic and becomes like the most popular project, and it's not necessarily a discerning audience of set designers. So this is one of the conundrums. It's a question, right? Is the crowd a good judge? Who determines if this is a beautiful piece of architecture? Is it a million random people, or is it better to tune into 100 established architects who have a portfolio of recognized and appreciated architecture? Should we tap into what they think over what the masses think? It's sort of this question about the critical mass, which is how many people like something, and the credible mass, which is who likes something. And maybe the next generation of curation is less about the critical mass and more about the credible mass. We think about this in the sense of, yes, we have a lot of community curation, but we also have some professional curation. We have some people on our staff whose full-time job is to look at the stuff that's trending and choose projects to get featured. And we're also developing something that we call Creative Rank. And what it does is it actually tunes into that credible mass algorithm. It focuses on who appreciates what project rather than how many people appreciate what project. And we're using it as another way to surface quality. And we're finding that you might have like a sophomore at SVA or Pratt or VISD or someone in like rural Romania, who's just doing some amazing work that has all the right people appreciating it, and they suddenly get recognition. And that is meritocracy, right? That's another thing we can do in a community to help careers get opportunity. And so if we perpetuate this, maybe we become like this data-driven perpetual talent edition, where every time we like something, every time we comment on something, the credibility of this, is determined by, what impact it has. And maybe this all kind of computes into a way to give us more opportunity for the things that we're really good at. And that's just an operating thesis. I would say our team is still early stage of pursuing this, but it's something that we are trying to imagine, which is leveraging the masses to match the best talent with the best opportunity. And I think it's worth striving for. A lot of communities work against this. Here's an example of a crowdsourcing spec contest website that had a client, a 55 DSL, which is a sub-brand of Diesel, and they needed a new logo. And so what do? They go to the site and they say, let's get the designers of the world to build a logo for us. And so they had over 15,000 submissions for a 1,500 euro prize, okay? 15,000 submissions. And we asked people how many hours they spent on the submission of a logo for this contest. And the average was about 3 hours, which is certainly not enough to do like due diligence on the brand and like create a great brand identity that matters, but it's way too much when you do the math. because 3 hours, it actually ends up being over 4 years of 24/7 creative labor around the world went into 55 DSL's logo and a €1,500 prize, which is really a tragedy, right? Of lost creative potential and talent. And by the way, the worst part is these people put these logos up there with their name on them, and it becomes attributed to them, and then they come up in Google search as doing this crap work. So it just doesn't move the ball forward. And so that's another way we can kind of combat. You know, if we have the credible mass rather than the critical mass, instead of inviting 1 million people to participate in a logo competition, let's actually invite 10 people that we know are credible and good enough based on the algorithms to at least pay to participate, and pick one of them still to win and win the whole bounty. But at least everyone gets paid for their work based on the quality of who they are. And there's some other industries where that's done, and I think that's something that we should explore, and you should adopt and explore in however it is relevant to you. So the third thing we learned about and thought a lot about is the loss of attribution in the web. And I wanted to talk to you about this because a lot of you are in power to either foster attribution or limit attribution. And when people limit attribution in their websites, for content generation websites, they don't do it out of a negative source. They don't do it out of meanness, right? They're doing it because they want the website to be more beautiful. They want the images to just load up and populate and surprise the viewer and connect people and whatever. But it's important. Attribution is really important. And we thought a lot about this. We made sure that every project can have everyone that actually was involved with the project. So we have some projects that are like owned by half a dozen people or 20 people. I'm sure, Al, you see all kinds of crazy stuff in your team. So we really try to foster attribution on projects, but we've also started to push partners. We were actually one of the first of 4 partners with Pinterest pushing the debut of attribution pins. So actually when you click on a pin, you see multiple links all back to the source. And for a pin from Behance, not only does the image go directly back, but also there's a link to the person's portfolio as well as the project. There are actually 5 total links. And if you think about it, actually, Pinterest is one of the first real sites that did this. Tumblr and others, when you click on the image, you stay in the site. And the reason that everyone thought Pinterest was crazy to do this is because they were bouncing their traffic. Why would you ever want to send someone to another website? Of course, that's going to be Pinterest's business model at the end of the day, is driving traffic to websites. But most blogs and magazines just keep people in and don't want people to leave. So also now being a part of Adobe, which happened just about 2 years ago, we're thinking about attribution for projects done while they're being created. So instead of just the projects themselves, but even when you're sharing from Photoshop, and pushing to Behance, can we actually start tracking the attribution of who did what in the work? So that's the kind of stuff that we're starting to think about as part of the Adobe family. So the realization here is that if you actually foster attribution, perhaps someday discovery will outweigh referral when it comes to people getting opportunity. Perhaps you won't go to headhunters anymore, or have to really search. We'll just kind of discover things and know who was behind it, and discover talent naturally based on seeing who actually did what. So it's another thing to think about here. So how will the web advance creative industries and culture as we know it? These are the 3 things that we talked about. If you foster the intersection, great ideas result, and the creative fields are pushed forward. You get new things like graffiti light art when you do things like that. If you tap the credible mass, rather than always being swayed and obsessed by the critical mass, really you can actually help the best talent get the spotlight that they deserve. And lastly, if you have an ecosystem that fosters attribution, you discover and you can really match the best talent with the best opportunity. So those are 3 thoughts that we learned that we think really parlay into this really, somewhat lofty mission that we have of creative meritocracy, where somehow, some way, the greatest creative work gets discovered, the greatest creative talent gets the opportunity that they deserve based on merit and merit alone. So those are a few thoughts, and that they keep us up at night, and things that we've kind of dealt with over the years as it relates to growing our community. And now I want to just share a few lessons learned around building a community that I think you will probably already have thought about, but things that we really hold true. And one of them, I tried to pick some somewhat counterintuitive ones, but It's interesting. A lot of the great relationships we've made with members over years has been when we made a mistake and we reached out and apologized. Even recently, I know, Al, your team, when we have outages and stuff like that, and we reach out to people to apologize, and we get great feedback on the experience, and people thank us and they connect with us. So every time we've had mistakes, even like 6 or 7 years ago, when we lost a few people's content that had been published the night before, it was like the cardinal sin of a user-generated website is don't lose your members' content. And we were just distraught. We emailed, it was like 100 people. And every email, I was even CC'd on every email, we felt so bad. And people were replying saying, hey, thank you so much for reaching out, no problem, and thanks for all that you're doing. And it was like, some of these actually started email chains of suggested features and stuff like that. So turn mistakes, turn lemons into lemonade, blah, 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 like just run with mistakes, because you're building relationships more than you're building a big, massive, community. You're building relationships, and you should use opportunities like this to foster them. I also think it's important that we ground ourselves with the fact that community starts with utility. And I get a lot of pitches from entrepreneurs who are building communities now, and a lot of them are for novelty purposes, or, oh, wouldn't it be great if these people connected, or these people connected? I really think that at the end of the day, community is about utility. And I remember when we were starting Behance in 2006 timeframe, we had our first and only focus group, actually, of creative professionals. And we had them come in, and we had just a few people on the team at that time, and we said to people, we're thinking about doing a bunch of things, including building an online community, and people said that was the worst idea, because they already had MySpace and Facebook. And MySpace, right? And DeviantArt. So those are the three that we heard. And we were told, pretty much, focus group, everyone kind of has groupthink too. Everyone was like, no, don't do that. You're wasting your time. Can you pass the wine? That was basically the tune of our focus group. So then we said, okay, well, fine, bad idea, our bad. What are you struggling with right now? And the room just like lit up with, oh, well, I never get attribution for my work. My portfolio is always out of date. I never have time. It's like the cobbler's new shoes. I build websites for people, but my portfolio is never up to date on the web. It's really hard to get hired. I have the same headhunter I've been working with, and they take advantage of me and pay me nothing. They kind of kept going through this list of problems that basically were saying that there was no transparency in the creative industry. They got no credit for their work. There needed to be a more efficient way to manage your portfolio and get exposure. And so we were taking notes, and they left, and we were like, wow, this group, it's a classic example of they think they know what they want, but they don't know what they need. And so community really, I think, starts with utility. Is tuning into the problems that you're trying to solve for the people that you're gathering, rather than doing what most groups do, which is say, let's start with a community, and let's start with who follows who, and let's have great forums and great topics, and let's go in there as community managers and start the conversations, and as if it's like fire and you just light it and then it just ignites. It doesn't work that way. You have to tune in and solve core problems. That's the only reason people come back twice, is when you're solving a problem. And then the third thing, I think, is that we have to remind ourselves that we are stewards and not owners. And this is one of those things I actually had to really make sure Adobe believed before we joined them a couple of years ago, which is that companies don't own communities. The community owns the community. And every time someone suggests something that we do to Behance that I think compromises that, I remind them that if everyone goes in tomorrow and deletes their portfolio, boom, we've got a community of 0, and it's a worthless asset. What communities need is not owners, they need stewards. They need people who clean up the trash, who take care, who listen to people and give them what they want, who more follow than lead. And I think a lot of companies that are trying to get into the community space just don't get this. They think that they need to start and own a community. I've seen communities start where every comment has to be approved by the company. I've seen some crazy stuff. And the community, if they don't take ownership over their own space, they're not going to make that space beautiful. And I hope you make your spaces beautiful. Thanks.